The execution dress of Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette, once the Queen of France, faced her execution with a composed demeanour as she was led to the guillotine. Despised by many across the nation, she and her husband, King Louis XVI, were blamed for the widespread suffering in France. While the royal family indulged in extravagant parties, the general populace endured hunger and hardship. The revolution that erupted caught many by surprise, leading to the shocking execution of both the king and queen. Ironically, the guillotine, a device her husband had supported, was the instrument that ended her life. On the 16th of October 1793, Marie Antoinette ascended the scaffold, and with a simple apology to her executioner for stepping on his foot, she met her fate as the blade swiftly severed her head. Her trial, which began on the 14th of October 1793, brought forth numerous accusations, including treason, depleting the national treasury, and conspiring against the French state. Despite many thinking she might be exiled, her destiny had likely been predetermined by the Committee of Public Safety. Found guilty on all charges, including the grave offence of declaring her son as the new King of France, she was sentenced to death. Fearing a potential rescue by Austrian forces, the authorities hurried her execution. In her final hours, Marie Antoinette penned a letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, expressing deep love for her children. This letter, however, never reached its intended recipient, and she also composed a will, which was handed over to Robespierre. As the moment of her execution drew near, Marie was subjected to the indignity of undressing before her guards. She had wished to wear a black dress as a symbol of mourning for her lost life and country, but the guards denied her request, fearing the message it might send to the people. Instead, she was forced into a plain white dress, a colour traditionally worn by the widowed queens of France, symbolising the death of their husbands. Marie Antoinette's final attire in the Conciergerie prison, often referred to as the antechamber to the guillotine, was meticulously noted by a young attendant named Rosalie. Rosalie provided a detailed account of the Queen's clothing beneath her outer garments. The Queen wore a fresh white chemise, likely made of silk, which served as an undergarment beneath her dress. This chemise was intended to protect her outer clothes from sweat and oils. During her trial, she had worn a different chemise, which was stained, possibly with blood, fueling speculation that Marie Antoinette was suffering from a serious illness, such as uterine cancer, during her final weeks. Over the chemise, Marie Antoinette was dressed in a simple, loose white gown provided by the prison guards. On her head, she wore a plain white cap, devoid of any mourning decorations, as the revolutionaries forbade her from wearing dark colours or anything that might evoke sympathy. The fear was that mourning attire could lead the public to see her as a martyr or saint, potentially swaying them against the revolution. In addition to the white gown and cap, Marie Antoinette was said to have worn black stockings, which were given to her in prison. After her execution, her body was hastily buried in the Madeleine cemetery. Decades later, when her remains were exhumed, the stockings helped in identifying her decayed body, along with some hair found on her head. There are also reports that she wore prunella shoes, a pair of rich purple footwear with small heels, on her final journey. These shoes were allegedly smuggled out after her execution and kept safe by her allies, eventually ending up in a museum in France. Marie Antoinette also had a white triangular shawl that she wore in her prison cell. However, it remains unclear whether she was allowed to keep it on during her execution, as such an item could have interfered with the guillotine's blade. In preparation for her execution, her hair was cut short to ensure the blade would not be obstructed, allowing for a clean, swift execution. Marie Antoinette's final journey to the guillotine was marked by a sombre and silent resignation. As she was paraded through the streets of Paris in a cart, she was met with a barrage of insults and jeers from the crowd. The former queen, now stripped of her royal dignity, remained quiet, her gaze fixed on the fate that awaited her. Even when her attending priest attempted to offer words of comfort, she refused to engage, lost in her own thoughts. On the 16th of October 1793, around midday, Marie Antoinette arrived at the execution site. With the help of the executioner and guards, she ascended the steps to the scaffold. Her final recorded words were a brief apology. "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it on purpose," uttered when she accidentally stepped on the foot of the executioner. These words, though mundane, highlighted her wary acceptance of her circumstances after enduring years of harsh treatment at the hands of the revolutionaries. The very scaffold where her husband, King Louis XVI, had been executed only months earlier, now awaited her. She was strapped to the board and positioned under the guillotine, and in a swift and brutal moment the blade fell, severing her head cleanly. The executioner then lifted her head and displayed it to the crowd, who responded with jeers and boos, celebrating the death of the former queen. After the execution, her body and head were placed in a coffin and transported to the Madeleine Cemetery, where she was buried in an unmarked grave. Before her interment, Madame Tussaud, known for her wax figures, quickly made a death mask of Marie Antoinette's face. Although her grave was initially unmarked, her burial site was not kept secret, marking the final resting place of the once powerful queen. In the years following Marie Antoinette's execution, visitors from foreign lands often came to honour her memory. Decades later, during the brief Bourbon Restoration, a decision was made to exhume her remains and transfer them to the Royal Mausoleum at the Basilica of St. Denis. Her burial site was located with relative ease, as it had been well documented, and her remains were found in surprisingly good condition. Unlike her husband's, her body had been preserved due to the quicklime meant to hasten decay, solidifying on top of the coffin instead of affecting her remains. Among the items found with her were the very stockings she had worn to her execution, a crucial detail that helped confirm her identity. These stockings were notable because they were commonly given to those sentenced to die by guillotine. The clothing Marie Antoinette wore on the day of her execution was deliberately chosen to prevent any public sympathy. The prison guards and authorities refused to let her wear black, the colour of mourning, and instead dressed her in white, the traditional colour for widowed queens of France. Marie Antoinette's fate is often viewed as a tragic one, with many believing that her execution was unnecessary. By the time of her death, she held no real power and posed very little threat, leading some to argue that exile would have been a more fitting punishment. However, Robespierre and other revolutionary leaders were determined to see her dead, and they achieved their goal, executing her before a massive crowd using the same guillotine that had claimed her husband's life.